Catherine Gibson for Insight. Today I'm joined by Declan Walsh, The Guardian's correspondent in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Declan, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
I'm wondering, what's been the reaction in Pakistan to Osama Bin Laden's death?
Well, initially there was this incredibly sort of stunned reaction from people here. Really, they found it very difficult to believe that Osama bin Laden, the world's most wanted man, had been hiding in their country all of these years, particularly as Pakistani officials had been vociferously denying that this was the fact for so long. And then that really sort of turned to a mixture of anger at the Americans, for having crossed the border apparently without permission, embarrassment at the fact that this man was here, and actually in the case of a lot of Pakistanis, really outright denial. I mean, I spoke to so many people in Abbottabad, that's the town where bin Laden was eventually killed, and a lot of people there really said that they just couldn't believe that either that he had been hiding in their town, or they couldn't believe that he was dead. So it's been a very varied reaction. But the one thing there hasn't been, most interestingly in a way actually, is there hasn't been a great deal of kind of public protest here. We see these television images of street rallies where people burn the American flag and so on. I mean, to be honest, that's something that's pretty common here. It doesn't take much, really to get at some of these minority religious parties to protest against the US, but there hasn't been any kind of major street demonstration, which suggests to me that most Pakistanis are very uncomfortable with what's happened. Some of them are very embarrassed, but it's not something they feel strongly enough about that they want to go out and shout in the streets about.
Do you feel that there's a lot of anger about the US violating Pakistani airspace to get to that compound?
There's certainly a large degree of that, yes. People are very unhappy that that the U.S. Special Forces team crossed the Pakistani border, entered a major town, carried out a very violent raid that lasted almost 45 minutes, and then left with the world's most wanted man, dead in the back of the helicopter, unchallenged. And I think there are two things people are angry about or worried about as a result of this. One of them is the fact that the US asked no permission, so it seems to come and do this. And secondly, really, a lot of anger has been directed towards their own military here. The Pakistan's military has long been considered to be the sort of bedrock of the state, the most stable institution, the institution that sort of glues Pakistan together. It also absorbs a huge amount of the national budget. And now we're seeing a situation where apparently the Pakistan army doesn't seem to be capable of protecting its northern border against these forces coming through. Now, of course, this was a special forces raid.
Right.
They were using very advanced technology, probably more advanced than anything Pakistan has. And so, some may say it would have been very difficult for them to detect this. But still, for Pakistanis, this has been a great blow to the prestige of the army, and we've seen really unprecedentedly sharp criticism of the army over the last week.
And do you feel that the average Pakistani on the street buys this idea that the government and the military had no idea that he had been in Abbottabad for that long?
No, I think they find that very difficult. People here are very used to the military running things in a very opaque way. Obviously it's a country which has had a number of military coups over the last 60 years. The generals have actually run this country for a longer time than the civilians have. And the intelligence service here, the ISI, really has a formidable reputation. People believe it's capable of all sorts of things, some of which it is and some of which, frankly, it isn't. But that's the reputation it has. So, people here have taken a very cynical view to the government denials, that they didn't know about this, and there have been a lot of suggestions that, perhaps they're pulling the wool over our eyes, perhaps they really did know.
We're hearing that the U.S. Congress is considering cutting aid to Pakistan in light of these revelations. How are the Pakistani people reacting to that?
I don't see that as a very, it's not a very public issue right now. Certainly there have been these noises from Washington about cutting aid, but I haven't seen, that hasn't really entered the political equation here just yet. Partly, I suppose, because these threats have not been made by the U.S. government. They've been made by senior congressional leaders and so on. And you know, Pakistanis have a very complex, really, relationship with U.S. aid. You know, this is a country that received massive amounts of U.S. aid, most of it to the military, it has to be said. But most ordinary Pakistanis feel that they don't see this aid. They feel that either it's wasted, or that it disappears into the pockets of their politicians or of their army generals. So that's why it hasn't really taken off as a political issue here, even though it's something that's very much on the minds of the country's civilian rulers, because they really rely on this aid to help balance the books. This is a country that's going through, apart from everything else, a really severe economic crisis at the moment. There's a huge balance of payments deficit. You know, the currency is looking very vulnerable. The country is on life support from the IMF. So if the Americans were to cut aid, the people who are in charge of the country's finances know that that would be, you know, a really devastating blow.
And as far as the war in Afghanistan, do they see this as giving the U.S. good reason to pull out?
Yeah, that was one of the first reactions that we saw coming up about this Osama thing. We had Imran Khan. He's a famous, nationally famous cricketer here, turned politician. I remember on the first day, one of the statements he issued was, he said, "Okay, now that the Americans have gotten Osama, could they please leave the region, including Afghanistan?" But you know, again, when you get to the level of people in government, things suddenly get much, much more complicated. Populist politicians, you know, campaign on the slogan of getting America out, but politicians who are having to deal with the, you know, nuts and bolts of policy every day, they realize that a precipitous American pullout from Afghanistan without some sort of settlement, some sort of durable political settlement, could really be disastrous for Pakistan if it all went wrong. You know, anything that goes wrong in Afghanistan can always spill over the border here. So I think there's a lot of nervousness about what this is going to mean for Afghanistan. You know, there's a pretty ambiguous attitude from a lot of people here to Pakistan, or to Osama Bin Laden. You ask them what they think. You know, people haven't been celebrating the death of Bin Laden. They haven't exactly been mourning it either. There's a sort of ambiguousness, you know. People see this as an American issue, effectively. And, you know, it is true to say that you do meet a lot of people here, unfortunately, who seem to believe that the 9/11 attacks were perhaps some sort of conspiracy. They don't think that it was quite as presented, that maybe the CIA was involved and so on. You know, and in a way that kind of speaks to their own relationship with power as much as what they really know about America. You know, people here see their own government as being something that's opaque, that they can't really control, even though there are there has been quite a good election in 2008. People feel that, you know, their vote doesn't necessarily determine who runs the country. And that's a big part of the cynicism they have here.
So you don't see a lot of interest in a Pakistani government investigation into what happened with Osama bin Laden then?
Well, they're certainly going to go through the motions of an investigation. You know, there's a lot of political pressure to find answers about why Pakistan's intelligence service performed so badly over this Bin Laden issue. There's a lot of pressure to find out about you know, why the country's about whether there was, you know, some knowledge of Bin Laden by the country's intelligence service. So you know, I think that there is going to be an investigation, but the investigation that's just been announced by the Prime Minister is one that will be conducted by the military itself. So it's hardly going to be a sort of an outside and impartial one.
Right.
It will be highly politically sensitive. I'm not sure if people really believe that it's going to give them the answers that they're looking for.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time out to discuss all of this with me. Thank you.
That was my pleasure.
Great.